All right, today we're talking about the single most important asset in life. I'm not talking about courage. I'm not talking about sales chops in business. It's trust. And I have an expert in trust. His name is David Horsager. He's going to tell us all about it and the research that he's done in just a second. So stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corkin here. I am this host of this show, and you know, if you listen every week, that we have great founders, CEOs, entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies. We've had Netflix, Grubhub, Redfin, Gusto, Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard. Check out the archives. Lots of great episodes for you to check out there. And before we get into this episode is brought to you by Rise 25, our company where we help businesses to give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by helping you to run your podcast. We are an easy button for companies to launch and run a podcast. We do strategy, accountability, and full execution. And, you know, David, I know that we like to joke that Rise 25 is like the team of magic elves that run in the background and make it look easy for a company to go out and be there in front of the camera and to create amazing content and amazing relationships and build trust, which is what we're going to be talking about here. So that is really the most important thing for me, is building relationships. And that's how I have done it for the last 15 years. If you have any questions, go check out our website, rise25.com, or email us at support@rise25.com. But let me tell you about David. So Dr. David Horsager is the CEO of Trust Edge Leadership Institute. He's an inventor of the Enterprise Trust Index and director of the global study Trust Outlook. He's also a Wall Street Journal best-selling author and senior fellow at Indiana Wesleyan University. He's advised a range of companies that you've heard of before: Delta, McDonald's, FedEx, Toyota, admirals in the Navy, you name it, decades of research. And his newest book is called Trust Matters More Than Ever, 40 Proven Trust Tools to Lead Better, Grow Faster, and Build Trust Now. Was released just a couple of months ago. And David, I'm really excited to dive into all these different topics with you. But first of all, you learned about trust. You know, some people that I have on this show, they had a bad experience, and that's what taught them to be fascinated with their field of study. But for you, it was actually a good experience. You grew up on a farm in a poor county in northern Minnesota, and you observed your father, who actually was a trusted leader. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I think my mom and dad both were. And of course, the research came later and all that. But I just think of, why did people love working for him so much? Why he did the same thing we say on stage and off. Like one time, you know, we're driving around the farm. It's none of my older siblings are around. It's middle of the summer, and we're checking the beans, and kidney beans, navy beans, like you have in Chile. And it's public dirt roads. Remember, our farm is 8 miles from the nearest town of 500 people. You can't see another farm from ours, but it's public roads around dirt roads. And we're on the far reach of the farm, public dirt road. There's some junk in the middle of the road. And I'm just like, that there was some litter, and I knew something about my dad. He hates litter. He doesn't say much. He's a great guy, but he swerved that pickup truck over in such a way that my door was immediately above the litter, and I knew what I was supposed to do. I opened the door. I'm 10 or 11 years old. I reached down and I picked up the Playboy magazine. And now I'm not here to tell anybody on here what's right and wrong. I used to be an ethics professor. I am here to say, if you act on what you say you don't believe, you'll lose trust in less than a second. And I knew what my dad said he believed about this kind of thing. I'd seen him mentor our rough, tough hired guys. I'd seen him mentor my older brothers. I knew exactly what he thought, but today I'd see it because some random time that morning, we drove up to the home front, up the dirt driveway, all that stuff. And he dropped me up the house. I helped mom or whatever, no windows on that looked back at where he drove out to the shop, started working on tractors. And some random time, the phone rang. And back then it was one phone with a cord attached, right? And mom took a message. Usually nothing was so urgent. She'd put it on the message on dad's lunch spot. But on this day, she said, "David, go give this message to your dad." So I took the message. I ran out in the attached garage. Remember, no windows on the backs of the house. The shop is 100 yards away. No way he'd think I was watching. But instead of busting through the entry door, I paused inside and I peered through this one little entry door window silently. No way he would have thought I was watching. But I paused inside and silently watched my dad from 100 yards away pull himself out from under the tractor, walk around the other side of the combine, walk between two trees without thinking a soul's watching. I watched him open the door of the backside of the pickup, reach under the seat, pick up that Playboy magazine, and I watched him keep his arm outstretched and without a glance walk 30 paces over to the shop furnace where I saw him throw it into the fire. Do I trust my dad? Yes, because he does what he says he'll do, even when no one's looking. That's where I create the habits for when someone just might be. So later I learned what research around trust looked like, but I thought, why do people love working for him? Is he the best farmer in the world? No. But is he the best leader? Maybe in some ways. And those things that nobody sees, that was one thing that I always think about. Wow, he is trustworthy. And people see that even when they don't see that behind the scenes look.
I love the way you tell that story because, boy, that could have gone in a different direction. We're like, which direction he going with this story here, But it had a happy ending, so to speak. Anyways, so I want to ask you about I have so many questions about that, but in this virtual world we live in where we're not often face to face unless we're doing farming or something like that, how do you build trust when someone's not going to see you, from a distance and be able to judge the way you are?
Yeah. So, the 8 pillars of trust that's in that book you mentioned, trust matters more than ever. And, there's a 5 steps of trust, that I thank you so much. She just saw that I tipped my coffee over while I was talking to you there. So I'm just going to set that, just stop the bleeding.
I love the authenticity. Thank you. Good.
There we go. There it went.
I think you're actually demonstrating the answer to the question, right?
Yeah. So let me, that's a big thing. Cause you think of the pandemic, like all of a sudden the CEO went from the ivory tower and all of a sudden they also had, cats jumping on their keyboards and kids in their undies behind them. Right. So that was one thing, but there's more to it. And this, I give 5 steps here. Now, everything comes under, we'll talk about later, the 8-pillar framework. Trust is built by these 8 traits that we'll talk about a little bit later. That's how trust is built. Everything comes under those 8. Globally, that's been revalidated by outside universities. That's how we've used it in, pro sports teams and presidents of countries and companies. But I'll give you a couple things right away. Let's get into some tools. So very quickly, a few ideas. For building trust remotely, funny enough, my new book, the book that comes out next year is called Trust at a Distance, how to manage trust remotely. So it's kind of interesting. I'm thinking about this a little bit right now. But is a couple ideas specifically for this problem are, number 1, you have to over communicate. And I mean, over communicate clarity. Number 2, and we can talk about what that looks like in that situation. Number 2, you have to have a space of connection as humans. So even this doesn't mean you have to do what some people think, and that is, you got to have a whole hour, all this time on kind of, just talking meetings that just connect people. But you have to take a moment, like a minute, 2 minutes at the beginning. How are you doing? Like, what do you look like? I remember in the pandemic, I was training all these nurses. They were overwhelmed and overworked. And I said, okay, before we get into it, we only have an hour together. We have to deal with this. I know it's tough. It's terrible. It was the heart of the horror of the pandemic. And I said, just take a moment, 30 seconds. Maybe there was hundreds of nurses on with me virtually. I said, pick up a pad of paper or Post-it note and just draw a picture of how you're feeling right now. And they took a moment and sad faces, mad faces, crying faces. And I said, now just hold it up to the camera for a moment. And they all held up the camera. And that moment allowed them to just breathe, be seen, and move forward in training and development, right? So that's another thing is somehow you've got to connect personally because people feel disconnected and isolated. Number 3, you got to have a predictable next meeting with your manager. People can handle stuff remotely, but if they don't know, they can hold things for a time. But if they don't know when their next meeting is, then they're like, oh, I don't know. They don't. But if they know, even if it's not till next week, they can hold that item, that thought, that problem, as long as they know. And so many people are frustrated around the world. And I don't even know when I'm going to meet with them again. One more thing would be this. There's a big tension between accountability, remote accountability, and connection and trust, excuse me. And so managers think, or leaders sometimes think, well, I don't even know if they're in their seat. I don't know if they're doing the work. I don't know if, what's going on there. And people, employees say, well, just trust me. I got it, right? Just let me do my thing. Well, what do we know? Both have kind of been wrong about this. We know the most I heard of an employee having was 4 jobs during the pandemic without working any of them,
Wow.
right? And they lasted a long time getting 4 salaries. And then on the other side, you have people micromanaging everything and saying, "Hey, I'm going to have a timer for every time I see your keystrokes virtually, so I know that you're sitting in your chair doing your work." Both can be problems. So one tip around that, one of many, would be, if possible, if you can, pay, promote, um, and reward on results. In a virtual environment, that can really help things. So there's just a few quick ideas. Like if you can, predictable next meeting, reward on results only, so that it doesn't matter if they're doing their laundry while they're doing the work or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
over communicate and make some space of connection.
Those are great. What was it that made you decide to study in your graduate work this idea of trust?
So I can still remember where I was. At an early age, I'd built this leadership development out. It mostly was I was speaking around the world for youth and colleges and that kind of thing. And I built this work so some companies and one of the military academies started asking about it. And I was actually I can still remember where I was, because in 1999, I think, up till that point, I think it was the most beautiful, expensive place I'd ever stayed. And I think it was like the Lowe's Resort somewhere in Arizona. And my wife was with me. We didn't have 4 kids yet. And I was standing out on the deck. And this isn't some big spiritual epiphany, but it was an epiphany of sorts. I was looking out at the sky, just thinking, talking to Lisa about the day. And I said, I don't think it's what they think. They think it's a leadership issue. It's not. They don't trust the leader.
Mm.
And then I started thinking, oh, that's the next issue. That's not a sales issue. The reason people aren't buying is they don't trust the product or the teacher, or the salesperson or something. And I started thinking, in a classroom, people, the only way to increase learning in a classroom is increase trust in the content or the teacher or the psychological safety or trust of the room. And I thought, oh, marketing message. The only way to make it stickier or more powerful is increase trust in the message. And innovation. If the team doesn't trust you, they won't share ideas. So trust goes down. And I started to see it as the leading indicator. And that led to the grad work that showed, and it really, I think, maybe was one of the first to prove out how a lack of trust is the biggest cost in a company, biggest cost in a country. I mean, the GDP is directly correlated to trust. The relationship you have with your spouse, partner, or friend is directly correlated to trust. So once we started seeing a lack of trust, the biggest expense, that was inspiring. Then I did all my grad work on it. And then, of course, we used it in companies, and we saw, you've heard it, we've had the Admiral of the Navy say we dropped suicide rates. We've had people say it tripled their sales. We've had one of the biggest companies in the world say it helped them gain 11% market share in a year. We've had people say it dropped attrition by millions. So we're using it to solve big issues. And that's the fun that this trust stuff works.
I want to break down some of those stories a little bit further, but before we get to that, I know when you started out, you had to have trust in yourself, because you were living in a basement in Minnesota, saying to your wife, "This is going to work out. Believe in me." She had to trust in you.
Totally.
And I know, because I've been there before, that can be really hard. So talk a little bit about that challenge.
It was hard. Really, the first decade of this work, from 99 to 09, once I started that company, I think we almost lost everything like 3 times. And Lisa, before kids, she was in it with me, working in the company and all that. But I mean, it was crazy. So we moved back from Arkansas. We'd been down there 4 years. We were living on a golf course. We had a salary. We had all this stuff. We moved back here on an idea, and to Minnesota, and we found a place to live for like $350 a month, which was lower than any apartment I could find. And it was a basement of an 86-year-old lady named Clara Miller's home. And what we didn't know is it didn't have a bathroom, it didn't have a kitchen, and it didn't have windows. And
sounds perfect otherwise.
The black mold was free. But the news is, we didn't know it was illegal to live in a windowless basement in Minnesota, because we didn't learn that until 2 years later when we moved out. And we would go 3 flights up to her bathroom that she let us share to go to. And we got 2 flights up. We had a half of a shelf on her refrigerator, and we lived there for 2 years. And what was good about that is I don't think many people would do that today, but we got absolutely focused. We had a part of a time where we didn't have any insurance. We had some sacrifices that I'm grateful that, worked out, that weren't the smartest choices. But we did get focused. And this is not advice for everybody. But I remember my brother saying to my brothers, like, do you think I should get a part-time job, or at least you should teach again, or whatever it is? And he said, I don't think so, David. I think if you have to, you will. And you need to have to. And he knew me. And it's like, so I got focused and worked from, we got up in the morning, we worked till 11 at night. I made calls, we worked on, so that was kind of the start of this, the entrepreneurial journey. And really, by the way, many people could do it faster, but it wasn't till a decade later, probably '09, till we really had the tipping point of, in our company. We had some big wins in that first decade, but we also, like, as you know, your expenses can easily be higher than your wins.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It's a different world now because of the tools available to us, like social media, like, what we're doing right now, podcasts, things like that. But, if you were starting over today and you didn't have all the items of trust that you have, you've got these best-selling books, you've spoken on stage, you've got all these different, marquee companies that you've consulted with, you've got degrees. If someone's starting over and they want to build trust and authority in a new field, what do they do?
Well, I'll tell you, the first thing that jumps to my head right here is make sure you build the character along with the competency. And that is there's a lot of people that are younger that have actually been able to succeed in getting their face out there. And I'm not like, podcasts are great. We've had one, all these things, books. But I mean, I would build character and genuine authority over fake, because it gets found out. Mm-hmm. You have a lot of people wanting to do it quick today. Entrepreneurism quick. And I'm saying I would have done a PhD earlier. Number one, I would have done a lot of things, like I would have done some things differently, written earlier. I think there's people today that they become kind of a YouTube star, but they don't have the character to handle it or the depth to handle it. So I'd say write your own books. Don't have someone else write them. Do some research yourself. Don't, do this kind of thing. Like, this is amazing, John. Maybe not from me, but from every other guest, you're learning something,
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And you're an expert, partly all your other things, but partly because somehow you have been able to get a one-on-one interview with brilliant people that have led and done things. That is a part of research. People trust you because you have transfer trust. You've been trusted by them. You've gained all this wisdom because of the ability to interview them, right?
Yeah, and not to break down the process too much, but that's why I mentioned the names of other companies at the beginning of the interview, is because, one, it conveys trust on the person that you're talking to, because you don't know me from Adam, but also for the listener too. If they're just tuning in, they're flipping around on Spotify or whatever, and they're hearing it for the first time, they need to know that this is something I've been doing for quite some time.
I think that's it. I think the other thing that you do well, and this has been critical for me. So first is capability, like character. Build the character along with, don't try to just get rich quick or try to be a star on something. I guess if I was pushing anybody today, gain some real depth. Like, there's a lot of people in our space that talk about trust. We kind of joke with and without research, and people saying all kinds of things today, but like that. I would just push some depth and a process for ongoing character development. I'm open with my team. Like, I love this. I'm passionate about this. I'm totally imperfect at everything I teach. And I talk today about how, I agonize that I'm not more what I live. Like, under certain parts of the pillars that I know are true. Like, I wish I was more compassionate. I wish I was more patient. Oh my goodness. Like, I'm not naturally patient. I have to work at that. Right.
Yeah.
So there's that part. Like, people, it used to be a big deal 200 years ago in American schools to teach virtues. They're almost not taught today. And many people fail at business because they aren't growing in virtues. So I know that's not fun. Everybody thinks they got it. They're good. Other people need that. So did Madoff. So anyway, that's one thing.
Yeah.
I would also, I would have a plan for keeping growing in competency, but I think there's another thing that you teach that I so believe in, and that is relationships with others. I mean, mentors, I said nothing great has happened for me without mentorship and relationships like you've, talked about and really encouraged others to have, because you can amplify or speed up learning. Like, you're smarter because of your podcast than other people your age that don't do podcasts or your experience, let's say, right? Because you're listening to others. And And same with like when I think of me, I think of business mentors for sure. Speaking mentors. People say, I was inducted into the Speaker Hall of Fame, and whatever, all this stuff. And I was just at this event that not too long ago, where it's one of the biggest leadership days in the country, and 10 speakers, and they're all more known than me. And I was the highest rated 2 years in a row. That's really cool. How did that happen? At the Hall of Fame thing, they said, "Oh, overnight success. Look at this guy." Like, I'm not that known. Well, one thing we're not good at is marketing, but we're good at getting results. That's the only reason we have work, probably, because people share it. But what they this the speaking side. Now, we know the research is important. We know that the trust tools are important, all that. But what about speaking? When you get paid at a high fee, especially for non-celebrity, it's hard work today. Like, there's a lot of speakers out there, right? Why am I so booked? Well, I went through it in my head with our team, and I said, well, I've had a speaking coaches that I get critiqued on for 30 years. I took acting classes, never wanting to be an actor. I took stand-up comedy classes, never going to be a stand-up comedian, but people are surprised that, oh, doctor, he's a preacher. I didn't expect him to be so funny. Like, was not natural at all. I took, I think of all the mentors and classes that just on the speaking side were important and valuable. And I think that's something, just like you teach, just in any part of business. Like, I've had speaking ones, I've had business ones, I've had financial ones, I've had marriage coaches to get better there, So I think health coaches, I've had, personal trainers. It's like that can amplify and speed up success because you have firsthand experience. And so that's another thing
no, I love that, because there are people who get good at hacking the YouTube algorithm or the TikTok algorithm or whatever, and they build a big audience, but then there's no depth behind it. There's no character behind it. So I love that. I'd love to break down some of these examples that you gave here. Like you mentioned, the admiral, the Navy said that some of this work helped to drop suicide rates. Help connect us for that. Like, how did that work exactly? How does building trust drop suicide rates?
Well, I mean, maybe you first have to know the pillars to go from. Like, I don't know.
Okay.
It's the content.
Yeah.
Then so there's several levels here. It's truth. Like, it's got to be true outside of you. The research proves it, but like, I didn't come up with trust. Trust was, right. And it turns out that trust is the leading indicator, I believe, right? So it drives things. How I build trust, that's the framework. That's the 8-pillar framework. And then you can't just have the overall like framework. You have to have actually tools you can use tomorrow morning, because the most motivating idea is not someone who climbed Mount Everest if I'm not going to do that. The most motivating idea is when I can use tomorrow morning to solve my problem. So you have to have these 3 things, and then you have to have a way to cascade that or feed that into a company or across a company, so they get a common language like the 8-pillar framework, and they get tools they can use. So there's 2 steps there. There's one, the actual stuff, and there's 2 is how do we do that throughout 15,000 Navy midshipmen or captains, and how do we do that through Penn State or University of Nebraska or parts of John Deere or whatever it is, right? So yeah, I don't. You can.
So go ahead. So there's the 8 pillars there, which incredibly all start with a C. That must have taken a lot of work to figure that one out. But take us through it.
Yeah. So number 1, we ingest. Don't think of them as kind of some pastoral 8 C's for cuteness. They each represent a really important research funnel. They are C's for clarity. 7 out of the 8 basically came out of the research that way, or very.
Well, that makes it easier then, I guess.
Compassion had care, and the connection pillar had collaboration as point number 2. So there's 1, and I'll tell you, it's pillar number 7 that we'll get to, that really a different word really represents it well. So here they are very quickly. Yeah. So this is how trust is built globally. Under these, there are tools. I could speak about any of these for 8 days, but let's go. How is trust built? Number 1, people, clarity. Clarity is builds trust. We trust the clear. We mistrust or distrust the ambiguous or the overly complex. So where I was a professor, if I complexify something in today's world, we lose trust because we lose clarity. Cleverness does not win today. Clarity wins. Barb having a little haircutting salon called Whispers on Main didn't work. She changed it to Best Cuts by Barb. People went there. Not cuteness, clarity. I drove by a bunch of, I was being driven to a speaking event recently, and there's all these stores or malls, and it was actually out near you in California. And there's one store that was packed full, packed. Every spot was full. I thought, wow, people know why to get off the highway to go to that store because it was bold letters, huge, and it was one word. And that was it. Liquor. And it just said liquor above the
liquor. That's it.
And that's all it said.
That's clear. Yeah.
But it was crystal clear. Everybody knew why they would go to that store, right? So 30. And you can think about this, like a leader might not be trusted if they're not clear about the vision. A manager, if they're not clear about the expectations. A salesperson, if they're clear about the wrong things, like they're clear about how cool they are, but not how, not about the benefits of the product to me. Or a teacher is not clear about the assignments. Kids go home frustrated. So clarity, number one. Number two, not in order of importance, but that's where we start. Yeah. Number two is compassion. We trust those that care beyond themselves. We don't want to be accountable to someone, or follow someone unless they care about something or someone beyond themselves, even if it's not me, right? Number three is character. Of course, we knew that would be true. We trust those that do what's right over what's easy.
Example of your father earlier,
sure.
Yeah.
Yep. Number three would be competency. You got to be capable at this. Like, I trust John to take my kids to the ball game. I know your character, I know your compassion. That doesn't mean I'll trust John to give me a root canal, right? So you be competent, and that's the same. We say it all the time. If you're leading the way you were 20 years ago, I don't trust you. If you're selling the way you were 10 years ago, I don't trust you. You've got to be getting better. And we can come back to this pillar if we want to, but the next pillar is commitment. We tend to trust those that'll stay committed in the face of adversity. So you're going to jump when there's a pandemic. I'm not saying you don't need mental health help or anything else, but I'm not going to trust you and follow you. I need someone I can trust in the middle of the tough, in the middle of the adversity. The next pillar is connection, the willingness and ability to connect and collaborate with others. So, there are counterforce. In fact, in the Trust Matters book, there at the end, there's a counterforce wheel to show what things are working against trust. And actually, I learned this came to me when I was working with building trust between Procter & Gamble and Walmart 15 years ago. And one of the Walmart folks, I think, said, feels like there were counterforces. And we saw these forces against trust. How do we remove those? And one of the counterforces of the connection pillar is siloing. Like, siloing or selfishness, where we stay like this. If we can open that up a little bit, we can increase trust and solve bigger problems. So then the seventh pillar is contribution. Remember, I said this is the better word for this.
The harder.
Contribute results. You've got to contribute results if you're going to be trusted. You can't just have compassion and character. I go in for amputation. Surgeon was kind. Surgeon was compassionate. Surgeon cuts off the wrong leg. We got a problem. You got to get right. Yeah. That's the same with all of us. And then final pillar is consistency. You are trusted for whatever you do consistently. Sameness, predictability is trusted. Predictable is another word under that research funnel. And that is just like, for good or bad, if you're late consistently, I will trust you to be late, right?
Right.
So we can go into any of those. We can give tools under any of them.
I'm thinking about the example with the Admiral of the Navy. So, I guess it could be complex why the Navy would have high suicide rates, but I can see how it could be lack of clarity from the leadership. It could be a lack of compassion for what the, enlisted, members of the Navy are going through. It could be lack of character. It could be a lack of competency in managing their career. I guess all of these things could contribute to higher suicide rates.
So basically, there were several things there, but what this gave right away was a language. So on deck, they had a language. Oh, that's a clarity issue. See, one of the big problems, people are trying to solve the wrong issue, or it's not a clear issue. So just like I said before, it's a leadership. No, it's not a leadership issue. The reason you follow a leader not is trust. Oh, it's engagement. Or like even this, David, you love C words. Isn't it ever a communication issue? It never, ever, 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 ever is a communication issue at the core. I know what you mean, or people mean, but they just say these things and they don't do they can't do anything about it. So if you go one level deeper, you get the point. And that is, for example, communication. Clear, number one pillar, is trusted. Unclear communication is not trusted. Compassionate is trusted. Hateful is not. High character is trusted. Dishonest communication is not. Competent communication is trusted. Incompetent communication is not trusted. So we can go a level down from what people are thinking about. leadership, communication, engagement, that those 8 C's, you actually give a language to solve the real issue. Then after that, you give tools that they can use to solve their problems. So on the Navy ships, one of the things they use, and this is a little too long to go into now, but the Trust Shield is a connection exercise that we offer that is powerful. They use this. One of the captains on one of the ships, and by the way, think of a carrier that's 4,000 or 5,000 people, by the way.
Yeah.
And they use this every time they do reviews. And he's a command master chief. So that's a tool to increase connection. They said this is the best way of doing reviews we've ever had, and it changed how they did reviews. Okay, doesn't take away accountability or anything. It just changes the way. So this example, a couple quick examples under clarity because they're easy to understand, like quick. So clarity, people weren't feeling clear. So I'll give a couple acronym ideas. One acronym that they started running their messages through. You want a clear message. Make sure it's MRA, memorable, repeatable, and actionable. Is that message? Oh, we've got integrity as a value. That's not actionable. If you don't have integrity, you go to jail. What is it you mean here? Like in our company, we say being the same on stage and off stage. What's that look like? That's integrity. That I can see it. Like, so memorable, repeatable, actionable. Another quick acronym would be, is ODC. So this is for getting clear expectations to your team members. So my first role in leadership, I was in a whole different area of this world. I was in Arkansas. I didn't, all my team was older than me. I had a lot of strikes against me. I wasn't getting what I wanted from my team. Finally, I got crystal clear, and I learned it was my fault, right? And so I started going through ODC. Here it is. O stands for outcome. Not micromanaging, not all this, but what's the outcome? If people don't know the outcome, they can't win. What's the outcome? Simple stuff, right? D is deadline. A deadline is an exact minute. It's not, I want to see that soon. It's, I want to see that 10 a.m. Friday. And the C stands for clarifying questions. Are you clarifiers, we say. Are you clear about this project? Just spit it back to me. Are we clear? And it just, that ODC project seems so simple, but it's like, oh, now I'm winning with expectations to my team. And I sometimes joke, but this works at home too. Like families, my daughters and I had a different picture of, view of what a clean room looks like. Okay. So I said, okay, here's the outcome. We're not going to be demanding. We're just going to say 2 things. 1, no clothes on the floor. And you know what clothes are? Yep. You know what the floor is? It's under there somewhere. Right. So we'll do that. And number 2 is the bedspread or top, comforter over the pillow. Like just that. I don't know what's going on underneath. Just put that up there. Okay. So it's just those things. I don't care about the plastic necklaces on the dresser. I don't care about what's going to fly out of the closet. Just those.
But it's clear on the outcome. Yeah. Yeah. And you have another acronym, ICE, appropriate for someone from Minnesota. Inspire, clarify, equip. Talk about that one.
So that is how our company serves others. That's not one of the tools in the book. That is, how do we fulfill the mission of building trusted leaders and organizations? How do we do that? Well, outside of the research we put out every year that, by the way, all of your listeners can have free access to at trustedge.com. You can have access to our global study, Trust Outlook. But we fulfill this mission through 3 things. I in ICE stands for inspire a shift of thinking around trust, inspire trust. And that is a lot of my books. That's my speaking 100 times a year at some of the biggest conferences around the world. That's me doing leadership days. That's my advisory work on boards that I'm on. That's I inspire. C is clarify and measure trust. So we have the Enterprise Trust Index, a way we measure trust and close gaps like we've done in some of the big companies you've heard about. That's kind of consultative process. That's C. The E is equip. That is how we certify. So we have certified partners on 6 continents using our work inside of companies and as independent coaches and contractors. And they can use our measurement tools. They get to use our content. They can lead leadership retreats with their team or by charging others. Doesn't matter. They can use our trust work and all the tools we have at the really cool platform portal to equip coaches and leaders and learning professionals and facilitators in our work. And that's how we equip them. There's monthly calls with everybody around the world. If they want to be on them, there's ways we keep equipping them. And that's what that stands for. So that's how we fulfill our mission of developing trusted leaders and organizations. The I is a lot of David. The others are more of the Institute.
It's good to know thyself, right?
Yeah.
I know we're short on time, and so I want to wrap things up here. And David, I'm sure we could go for 2 hours on this, but I appreciate the time you've given us here today. I love to wrap up with my gratitude question. So I'm a big fan of gratitude. I'm a big fan of also giving my guests the opportunity in the space to shout out any, especially peers, contemporaries, maybe mentors who've been there in the journey with you from that basement with the black mold to today. So who would you want to acknowledge?
Boy, that's hard to just say one, right? So I have so many, but one group that you made me think of was three best friends, Scott, Joe, and Jason. And we started meeting together in college, junior year. That was 32 years ago. And we stayed as kind of this accountability group. Each of us became leaders of organizations, companies, and one of them a ministry in inner city of Denver. And we one of them I talk to every other day. The others we meet with one really long weekend a year, sometimes 5 days. We just got off our meeting this last weekend. And we each share for about 3 hours through struggle. How can we do this better? Not ever how anybody else could do things better, but we share how we, what can we do better? How can we serve our clients? How can we serve our teams better? And we sharpen each other and hold each other accountable to that. And we are better as, husbands, as parents, as fathers, and as leaders in our organizations by a long shot. We have this we super love and care about each other, and we'll get in each other's grill and say, you got to stop doing that, or you got to start doing that. And so just one point on this that kind of to what we talked about before we got on the call, and that was how have they been a part of what you've done? And there's many, many ways they've been a part of and served and sacrificed. But you made me think about one thing. Before we were so like what people see now and the impact and the best-selling books and all that, when my first book came out in 2008 or 9, I didn't have any money. We were at the end. That was one of our 3 times when we about lost everything. And we were upside down and backwards on the house we were living in. And we looked kind of good because we spoke at some big events already. People were liking our work, but we were upside down and backwards. And this book came out and they knew it was a big deal. So one of them paid for all the food at a book launch in a really cool place. Another one bought me a new computer because he knew I couldn't afford it right then and paid for that. Another one paid for something else in our company to make this the whole book launch and make this happen. That was a massive tipping point, by the way, not just because of the book, but a bunch of things started happening in 2010 that changed our whole trajectory in the business. And we'd seen some real results by then and all that. But they just were willing to sacrifice in that way too. And it was a big deal.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, looking back, 2010 is such a precarious time coming out of the global economic downturn. So nice to hear that story. David, this has been great. Where can people go to learn more about you and connect with you?
The Institute, trustedge.com, trustedge.com, or my name, if you can spell it. I couldn't spell it till 8th grade either, but davidhorsager.com, you get a lot there. So either one, and they connect to each other. So love to there's also free tools, and you can go there from one of those sites, but for Trust Matters more than ever, there's a load of free tools, discussion guides, and everything else you can do with your team if that's interesting to you.
Awesome. David, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.